Hello and welcome back to the polling station. This week it's just me and Paul Krishnamurty. Johnny Ward will hopefully be back with us next week. And we've been blessed or cursed, depending on how you feel about the people involved, with quite a busy political week, including, of course, the first big name to fall of 2023, Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, announcing a resignation earlier today, citing burnout and saying that she just didn't have enough in the tank. Before we get into that, Paul, thanks for joining us as ever.
No problem, Will. Good to see you.
Likewise. Let's get straight into it with Jacinda Ardern, because the polls have been moving against her for quite some time, and Labour were looking shaky, certainly in the national averages in New Zealand. But does this still come as a shock to you?
Well, I wasn't expecting the news. It's kind of ruined one of my betting plans for 2023 because I was quite confident about backing the National Party to produce the Prime Minister, and I thought that because of Jacinda Ardern's profile, celebrity, you'd always be able to get a bit of value that side. But I don't think that's the case now. They've dropped their price has collapsed to like 1.4-ish, I think, on Betfair. I'm not. I mean, the more I think about it, it's quite logical for her. Best to quit when at the top, right? She's got a long career ahead of her in, no doubt, international politics, international organisations, private sector, whatever, and it makes sense for her to quit as a winner.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. And also, it's interesting, the international focus, because around the world, she's very much adored in certain corners, and especially in the international community. Now, there has been basically a lot of talk about who will replace her. And it's important, I think, just to explain for political punters that we may or may not get a contest. There's an internal vote within the Labour Party. If they can't choose on a replacement, that threshold being 60%, then it will go to a wider choice of the membership, essentially the sort of thing that we're used to over here. Now, at the moment, a few names have been flying around in the air from the Ardern cabinet, but I guess sort of the key question really to ask is, does this, and I know that listen, it's the 19th of January, an election could still be held even in the next calendar year, but will we look back on this sort of as the moment that it really became the Nationals to lose, that the Nationals sort of became next government in waiting?
I think so. I think that's exactly it. There was, as I say, they're ahead in the polls. They've been ahead in the polls for quite some time, and without professing to be an expert on New Zealand politics, the bits I've heard, either from polls, either from discussion of her COVID policies that no longer apply, to friends I've got who live over there who may or may not be representative but are critical of her. There's no doubt that the shine has worn off a bit, and I'm inclined to think that probably like the other English-speaking countries, New Zealand probably does, on average, tilt to the centre right, and perhaps she was just an exceptional celebrity, almost politician at a moment of global crisis, who won. So I'm not particularly surprised, and like I say, I really think National are probably certainties now.
Indeed. Just a quick run through who might replace Jacinda Ardern, because it's possible that we get it, well, we're definitely getting some sort of contest for it. And of course, Ardern is leaving at the end, well, the beginning of February, and the general election will be held on October the 14th, by the way. So we got another big election this year. So we got Chris Hipkins. He fronted the response to the pandemic. He was Minister for COVID-19. Then he became the Minister for Police, and he's also leader of the House. A very experienced name. I imagine he'd be up there as a front runner. Kiri Allen would be another history maker. She'd be the country's first openly gay leader. She's also the Prime Minister. She'd be the first Prime Minister of Maori descent. She's gotten quite a lot of kudos for battling through cervical cancer as well, which also was, she discovered it basically on the same day that there was an earthquake in New Zealand, and she has also practiced commercial and public law, which is interesting because, again, that's sort of lawyerly competence is something a lot of left or centre-left parties are trying to lean to right about now. Michael Wood joined the party quite recently. He's been a bit of a high riser, and he was also elevated quite quickly in the cabinet reshuffle. He was transport, then he's also got immigration now. And we've also got Nahia Mahuta, who I really hope I've pronounced correctly. I probably haven't. And she is the first female foreign minister of New Zealand. So in case anybody's looking to try and play in the market, those I think are the big four. Now we're going to move to the US. We're going to keep looking at this regularly because since we last talked about this, there's been a fair bit of movement, I think it's fair to say. And it's all about documents. Paul, fill us in on the document scandals on, well, both sides of the House, affecting one current president and one ex-president.
Well, as you may know, obviously from last year, Donald Trump's home was raided multiple times, I think, in search of classified documents that he had illegitimately taken and then resisted giving back to the National Archives. So that went back and forth for many months. He clearly didn't cooperate with the authorities, culminating in a raid. And then after that, having eventually surrendered 30-odd documents, it then turned out there were hundreds more, dozens more, right, which he had held back. So that is all under the watch of a special prosecutor, Jack Smith, and a lot of consensus legal opinion seems to be has to be charged, but we will see. Joe Biden, though, however, is now embroiled in a not entirely dissimilar, if not on the same scale, level of wrongdoing, allegedly, where it emerged at the beginning of last week that back in November, the Biden team had to hand back documents which were found at the think tank that he set up as he was leaving office as vice president. And this was released with the spin attached from his lawyers, that he's fully cooperated, it's just a misunderstanding, no wrongdoing. But then as the story's gone on, more documents have been found. And they've had to fess up to that. Now, as far as I am aware, Biden has fully cooperated with the authorities at all stages of this. And thus, according to the legal opinion that I've heard, generally is that there's no way he'll be charged for that, right? At worst, it will be a stern report that kind of criticises his carelessness, as happened to Hillary Clinton with the email, if you remember, back in 2016. Whereas Trump is far likelier to create an indictment. However, what this has done is, of course, this has now prompted comparisons, and Team Trump are going to say throughout, one rule for us, one rule for them. Why isn't his house being raided, etc., etc. Look what a big deal the liberal media made out of my documents, and now they've got nothing to say about him. So it's very problematic for Biden on a brand level, on a news cycle level. But what's more, because the Republicans now have the House, they are absolutely certain to investigate this and any other possible wrongdoing to the nth degree for the next 2 years. Right now, how that plays out politically is something we will see, but it can't be good news, can it, for the incumbent? And I think that's what's driven the market back out. Whereas we were in agreement a couple of weeks ago, that Biden was a certainty pretty much to declare and be the Democrat candidate. Now you have to wonder, is even if he does declare, will this last down the line? Will he be too damaged in 6 months, 9 months' time to be on the ticket? And that's why he's drifted out.
Very good explanation there. I mean, personally, my initial reaction is that whilst this is a problem, and I think it's it's going to be a medium to long term one at the least. I still wonder if there was a little bit of overreaction on one or two counts. Firstly, a lot of people seem to be pricing in a very severe consequence before we know exactly how the legal challenge is shaping up. And also, I think people aren't pricing necessarily Biden's cooperation with the DOJ, whilst Trump has been very much extremely obstructive, as is, his usual MO. And also the political realities, because Trump is going up against DeSantis, right? The market is telling us he's going up against DeSantis. That's going to be a very much, it's going to be a very sustained political battle. And he'll have to put a lot of energy into that. And the two of them might end up knocking each other's reputations quite a bit. That's usually been how things have gone in primaries. I don't know that this necessarily moves the needle massively in terms of people looking for a challenge to Biden. I never saw the appetite really for it beforehand, and I think a lot of people still don't have sudden enthusiasm to go and challenge a president who's done better, I think, than most people would expected. So I wonder, I'm sort of leaning to the it's an overreaction stage, but I don't necessarily think we know the full picture just yet.
Yeah, I think everything you said is totally fair there. So the question is then, what does this mean betting wise? So I still think he's far and away the likeliest candidate. And I'm not getting in at 1.85 now. I think I got out of my position when it was about 1.57, 1.58, simply because why do I want to be holding a position like that for 18 months when I've already, made the profit, so to speak? So I'm out of it for now. Would I go back in? I think I'd probably want evens or better to go back in. But that's very possibly around the corner. Who knows? To me, the issue is, I think, like you say, there wasn't much enthusiasm for taking him on. Therefore, at best, there's going to be one or two presidential bids that have anything behind them, possibly Newsom. I don't know. I don't think so, but could be possibly one of these governors, up-and-coming governors, J.B. Pritzker, Roy Cooper, someone like that. But more likely is that Biden declares, nobody challenges him, nobody plans a challenge, but then over the autumn, over the winter, it's very possible, I'm not saying this will happen, but it's very possible that he is then very badly damaged by investigations, starts falling in the polls, head-to-head polls between him and whoever is the Republican leadership or likely leaders start looking bad. And that's when all the speculation will start in November, when there's no October, November later. And at that point, there's only one person the money's going to go on. That's Kamala Harris, because she'd be so far ahead in any short primary, any incomplete primary. I'd make her odds on, heavily odds on, really, because it's very hard to see how you challenge her from there. If there's a full primary, of course, everything changes. All sorts of people can come into it. But I'm not convinced we're going to get a full primary.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting as well way of looking at it. I mean, the one thing I would just say is, with Kamala Harris, two things come to mind. The first was how she performed. I know there are different circumstances, but the first was how she performed in the last set of primaries, where she had a lot of good initial momentum. Then things appeared to come off, the wheels appeared to come off quite rapidly. And I don't want to be totally disrespectful to her, because obviously she's held a lot of high office before, but she sort of fell into that vice president role, being picked as the running mate. So I wonder necessarily if it's a sort of concern, should what happens to Biden in your scenario play out, do people at the upper levels of the Democratic Party, and do people who are likely to be engaged in that primary think, is Harris our most popular option? Do we think she'd beat Trump again, or do we think she'd beat DeSantis again? It's safe. It's going to be one of them too, clearly. And the other thing also, I guess, is Harris hasn't been mooted ever since Biden started to get wins on the board, whatever, she's not been mooted as this definite successor in waiting in the way that some VPs are, I think, through a presidency. Admittedly, she's definitely got ambitions for it, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it happen at some point in the future. But the thing I've always thought is a lot of these concerns come down to a background worry about Biden's age. And this is a bit of speculation, obviously, but if Trump is still leading at the time of November, whatever, and Biden begins to wobble, does age becomes much less of a concern? We don't know how this will go right now, but it's interesting to note, looking at the latest polls, we have one close one between DeSantis and Trump from Yahoo News via YouGov. Everything else has been double-digit poll leads for Trump, bar Siena College, which has him 7 ahead, but admittedly very early days.
I think that DeSantis is polling brilliantly. I think as someone who's watched all these presidential races for decades, considering how early we are, DeSantis' numbers are amazing. They're absolutely amazing. A lot of those answers, pro-Trump answers, are default answers to a question from people who like Trump. Doesn't mean they are not open to an alternative. And I just don't buy it that the pub, even his support, even like the majority of his supporters, want to go into an election where they'll lose. And all the evidence is going to point that way, that he's going to fare worse than DeSantis, or let alone any other Republicans who come into it. The only thing that's kind of struck me a bit on that side is that suddenly DeSantis is a little bit friendless in the market. He was 2-1 a few weeks ago for the nomination on Betfair. Now he's 11-4. And that's despite Biden having a disaster with the documents issue. And Trump has come right back in from nearly 10 into like 6.6. Maybe DeSantis isn't going to run. Maybe people are getting wind of something. I don't know. But I mean, we can't say it's a certainty that he will run.
No, it's true. I was just going to jump on that point. There's a lot of political calculation for DeSantis to be had here, particularly the prospect of going up for a bruising battle against Trump, which, let's say he wins, may then be turned into something of a, well, he'll only third party us anyway, for us taking us all down in flames. Maybe 4 years on is better given how young he is. For a governor with his reputation, his profile, he's very young. There lots to think about there. Let's just quickly circle back to the UK, because we're well into the thick of things now. Parliament's returned, lots of big decisions for the government. At the moment, the political picture is stable, remains very stable. Labour are falls on with staff for the most seats at next election. They're 5 to 6 for a majority. It's 11 to 8 for a hung parliament. Widely acknowledged that Keir Starmer still very much in pole position. Rishi Sunak today went around on his levelling up tour, and there's been an attempt to move the needle. It's only just started, so no holes in it or anything. But has there been anything that's popped up here recently that makes you think that's worth watching out for, or makes you think the needle might move in a different direction at all?
The only thing that's really, to me, really that interesting at the moment about British politics, betting wise, and in terms of potential radical change, is the fact that I don't think Sunak is as safe as he might appear. I think that I still think that amongst Conservative commentators and supporters, from anecdotal conversations, there's total complacency here, right? There is a very pre-1997-esque atmosphere of like, oh, it will never happen. The country always swings round to us at the election. They'll be able to pull some rabbits out of hats. There aren't any rabbits. And I just don't see it turning around for them. And I think that, I really don't want to generalise about factions within Conservative Party, but you have to some extent, because it is a factional war. I think the sort of people that really think Sunak is the answer are really a deluded minority. You know, it's kind of like this. There's a parallels of when New Labour was finished and the Blairites just wouldn't shut up for years, as if like there was some great prince across the water who was going to save them. The public's moved on, and I think that the Tory party is inevitably going to be a far right party from now on. I can't see any other future for it. It's very much like the Republicans. So we should be looking at next leader, because I don't think Sunak got more than a couple of years at most.
Yeah.
And I think I had a bit of money on Suella Braverman, 25s, 28s, Betfair. I think that's really solid. I can see some logic in backing Boris Johnson to come back, although I don't think it will happen. I think something will be done, whether it's the Privilege Committee or something will be done internally to stop it. But that's where we should be looking. We should be looking at Sunak's exit date not being longer than, you know, end of 2024, start 2025, or a right-wing replacement as leader.
Okay, interesting. Are you at the current prices? We are 5-1. I appreciate the exchanges might be a bit bigger. In a sentence or two, you can give some reasoning. Are you pro or anti Boris in that next leader market?
Anti. I'm not. I wouldn't lay it. I can see it going, but I'd be anti. I think that's very short. Because also, if we're talking after the election, which has to be the favourite.
Yeah.
There's no way he's leader of the opposition. No way is he disciplined enough to do that job. Right?
Yeah.
And they won't see it that way. There will be someone else come along after the election. But I can see a narrow path that in a year's time, Sunak's doing so badly in the polls that there's another coup that puts Boris back in. MPs who were previously critical go with it because they just said we've got to throw the dice.
Fair. A couple of things to round this episode off. Whilst we're in Britain, there's been a very big constitutional confrontation between the Westminster government and the Scottish government over the Gender Recognition Act. And long story short, this has put devolution sort of right in the middle of things, and there's very much talk again that, you know, this could really reignite the independence movement. Long story short, because we haven't yet put our odds back up for in the Ref2, should it happen, but does this make calls for independence from, and I'm speaking of those who aren't necessarily already agitating for it, do we think this gives the independence movement maybe a 5 to 10% extra boost, at least in terms of relativity and people feeling that they need a second referendum?
I think 5 to 10% is pushing it. I'm not saying it doesn't give them a boost. It does illustrate their argument very well that they're not sovereign over their own laws, etc. But I don't think it's 5 to 10%. Personally, I'm sceptical that whenever an independence referendum happens, that people actually take the plunge, because I think, well, certainly if I was on the union side of this campaign, I would be pointing out at pains, remember Brexit, remember how divisive that was, how long it took to get the details right. We still haven't. It will be that on steroids. Skexit. You know, you imagine we'll still be arguing about the nukes in 2030.
Fair. And last but not least, anything else in world politics that is just worth noting? Going to try and do more of that this year. Lots of international elections coming up. So what are you seeing around the globe that we've not touched on so far?
Well, just really thinking about the elections further down the line this year. The one that would interest me most is Greece, because I lived there a lot of the time, where I'm quite confident that the New Democracy Party, the Conservatives, will get back in. Mitsotakis. Turkey is also very, very interesting. I really don't know enough about the validity of that election yet. You know what I mean? But it'll be certainly one to watch. And then Spain, get at the end of the year, I think that looks, all the polls suggest to me that's bad news for left. That's another defeat.
Okie doke. I'm casting my eyes towards two elections in Europe, Estonia and Finland. In Estonia, Kaja Kallas, I think, could be set for another term. In Finland, that election is looking very interesting and very tight. I've seen a couple of markets that have Sanna Marin about Bolton to be the next prime minister after this election. I think we might expect some movement there. Also, events in Ukraine as they continue sadly to appear to escalate even more could have an effect on those races. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me today, Paul.
Pleasure, as always.
And thanks very much to everybody who's either watched or listened to it. We really appreciate it. Do like this video and, of course, subscribe. We've got lots of other great content. And make sure to come back very soon for another episode of The Polling Station.